Pursuant to an agreement with the Ranking Member Nadler and without objection, Chairman Comer and Ranking Member Raskin will be permitted to participate in today's hearing for the purposes of making opening statements and asking questions of the witness. They each will receive 3 minutes for an opening statement and 5 minutes to question the witness. The chair now recognizes himself for an opening statement. Robert Hur was appointed special counsel on January 12th, 2023. He had a fundamental question to address. Did Joe Biden unlawfully retain classified information? The answer, yes, he did. Page 1 of Mr. Hur's report, he says this: our investigation uncovered evidence that President Biden willfully retained and disclosed classified materials after his vice presidency when he was a private citizen. He further writes, Mr. Biden willfully retained marked classified documents about Afghanistan and handwritten notes in his notebooks, which he stored in unsecure places in his home. Joe Biden kept classified information, and Joe Biden failed to store classified information properly. Mr. Hur made these determinations after interviewing 147 witnesses. He examined 7 million documents, including emails, text messages, photographs, videos, toll records, and other materials from both classified and unclassified sources. But there's more. Joe Biden not only kept information he wasn't allowed to keep, and he not only failed to secure that information properly, he also shared it with people who weren't allowed to see it. Shared that information with his ghostwriter. And remember, this is information that only individuals with a security clearance are supposed to see. Mr. Hur told us on page 200 of his report that it's the kind of information that, quote, risk serious damage to America's national security. And what did Joe Biden have to say about all this? What was his explanation? On page 94 of Mr. Hur's report, Joe Biden said he took his notebooks with him after his vice presidency because, quote, they're mine. And every president before me has done the same exact thing. Never mind the fact that he had never been president when he took this information, but what comes through is Joe Biden felt he was entitled. You can almost hear it. You can feel the arrogance in this statement. They're mine. But even with all that, Mr. Hur chose not to bring charges because, quote, Mr. Biden would likely present himself to a jury as he did in our interview of him, as a sympathetic, well-meaning, elderly man with a poor memory. A forgetful old man who Mr. Hur said did not remember when he was vice president, forgetting on the first day of the interview when his term ended, and forgetting on the second day of the interview when his term as vice president began. Mr. Hur produced a 345-page report, but in the end, it boils down to a few key facts. Joe Biden kept classified information. Joe Biden failed to properly secure classified information. And Joe Biden shared classified information with people he wasn't supposed to. Joe Biden broke the law. But because he's a forgetful old man who would appear sympathetic to a jury, Mr. Hur chose not to bring charges. Mr. Hur, we think it's important that you be able to respond to President Biden's response to your report. So we're going to play a short video of President Biden's press conference after your report was released, because there's things in this press conference that the President of the United States says that are directly contradicted by what you found in your report. So if we could play that video.
Hey, everybody.
Good evening.
Let me say a few things before I take your questions. As you know, the special counsel released his findings today about their look into my handling of classified documents.
President Biden, something the special counsel said in his report is that one of the reasons you were not charged is because, in his description, you are a well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory.
I'm well-meaning, and I'm an elderly man, and I know what the hell I'm doing. I've been president. I put this country back on its feet. I don't need his recommendation. It's
How
totally
bad is your memory, and can you continue as president?
My memory is so bad I let you speak. That's
Do you
my.
feel your memory has gotten worse, Mr.
No,
President?
my memory is not good. My memory is fine. My memory, take a look at what I've done since I become president. None of you thought I could pass any of the things I got passed. How'd that happen? You know, I guess I just forgot what was going on.
Mr. President,
If voters have concerns about your age, how are you going to assuage them? And do you fear that this report is only going to fuel further concerns about your age?
Only by some of you.
Mr. President, you cleared up criminal liability today. But do you take responsibility for at least being careless with classified material?
I take responsibility for not having seen exactly what my staff was doing. It goes in and points out things that appeared in my garage, things that came out of my home, things that were moved not by me, but my staff.
Mr. President, for months when you were asked about your age, you would respond with the words, "Watch me." Many American people have been watching, and they have expressed concerns about your age.
That is your judgment. That is your judgment. That is not the judgment of the press.
They express concerns about your mental acuity. They say that you are too old. Mr. President, in December, you told me that you believe there are many other Democrats who could defeat Donald Trump. So why does it have to be you now? What is your answer
Because
to
I'm the
that
most
question?
qualified person in this country to be president of the United States and finish the job I started.
Do you believe that? Why are you confusing the names of world leaders?
Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much.
I did not share classified information. I did not share it.
With your ghostwriter.
With my ghostwriter, I did not. Guarantee you did not.
But the special counsel said in the
Well, no,
report
they
that he
did not say that.
Okay.
He did not say that.
But Mr. President, one other.
Let me answer your question. The fact of the matter is, what I didn't want repeated, I didn't want him to know, and I didn't read it to him, was I had written a long memorandum to President Obama why we should not be in Afghanistan. And I was of this multiple pages. And so what I was referring to, I said classified. I should have said should be private because it was a contact between the president and the vice president as to what was going on. That's what he was referring to. It was not classified information in that document. That was not classified.
He called on me. When you look back at this incident, is there anything you would do differently now? And do you think that a special prosecutor should have been appointed in the first place in both of these cases?
First of all, what I would have done is oversee the transfer of the material that was in my office, in my offices. I should have done that. If I go back, I didn't have the responsibility to that. That was my staff was supposed to do that, and they referenced that in the report. And my staff did not do it in a way that, for example, I didn't know how half the boxes got in my garage until I found out staff gathered them up, put them together, and took them to the garage in my home. And all the stuff that was in my home was in filing cabinets that were either locked or able to be locked. It was in my house. It wasn't out in, like in Mar-a-Lago, in a public place where, and none of it was high classified. Didn't have any of that red stuff on it. You know what I mean, around the corners? None of that. And so I wish I had paid more attention to how the documents were being moved and where. I thought they were being moved to the archives. I thought all of it was being moved. That's what I thought. Now, what was the last part of your question?
Whether a special counsel should have been appointed in this case and in the case of your rival president, former president.
I think a special counsel should have been appointed. And the reason I think a special counsel should have been appointed is because I did not want to be in a position that they looked at Trump and weren't going to look at me, just like they looked at the vice president. And the fact is they made a firm conclusion. I did not break the law, period. Thank you all very, very much. The hostage negotiation, look. I'm of the view, as you know, that the conduct of the response in the Gaza Strip has been over the top. I think that, as you know, initially, the president of Mexico, Sisi, did not want to open up the gate to allow humanitarian material to get in. I talked to him. I convinced him to open the gate. Let them make them part of the Middle East and recognize them fully in return for certain things that the United States would commit to do. And the commitment that we were proposing to do related to two items. I'm not going to go in detail, but one of them was to deal with the protection against their arch enemy to the northwest, northeast, I should say. The second one, by providing ammunition and material for them to defend themselves. Coincidentally, that's the time frame when this broke out. I have no proof what I'm about to say, but it's not unreasonable to suspect that the Hamas understood what was about to take place and wanted to break it up before it happened.
Thank you, everybody. We're going to need everybody to hold for a moment.
Chair now recognizes the ranking member, Mr. Nadler, for an opening statement.
Mr. Chairman, I'm glad you have such information, such admiration for the president that you allowed him to take the first 10 minutes of this hearing. Mr. Chairman, House Republicans may be desperate to convince America that white conservative men are on the losing end of a two-tiered justice system, a theory that appeals to the MAGA crowd but has no basis in reality. But your comments today make me wonder if you have read the special counsel's report at all. The Hur report does help us draw a distinction between President Biden and Donald Trump, just not the one you want. Two distinctions, actually. First, the report is clear that, quote, at no point did the special counsel find evidence that Mr. Biden intended or had reason to believe the information would be used to injure the United States or to benefit a foreign nation, close quote. With respect to the classified documents found in President Biden's possession, quote, the decision to decline criminal charges was straightforward, close quote. And with respect to the special counsel's investigation, quote, Mr. Biden turned in classified documents to the National Archives and the Department of Justice, consented to the search of multiple locations, including his homes, sat for voluntary interview, and in other ways cooperated with the investigation, close quote. President Biden acted responsibly, cooperated completely, and the decision to decline criminal charges was relatively straightforward. In short, to borrow a phrase from the last administration, the Hur report represents the complete and total exoneration of President Biden. And how does that record contrast with President Trump, the documents he retained, and the criminal charges pending against him in Florida? We know that Trump deliberately took large amounts of classified information from the White House. He has admitted as much, occasionally pretending that he classified this information without telling anyone on his way out the door. We know that he stored that information around Mar-a-Lago in the craziest of places, on the ballroom stage, spilled across the floor of an unlocked closet next to the toilet. We know that he showed classified military plans to an author interviewing him at Bedminster. Quote, as president, I could have declassified it, Trump says on an audio recording. Now I can't, you know, but this is still a secret. Still a secret, close quote. So much for the declassification theory. We know from the indictment that Trump is alleged to have shared these classified documents with many other visitors to Mar-a-Lago. And we know that, despite this outrageous conduct, the Department of Justice gave Trump every opportunity to avoid criminal charges. Again, in the special counsel's words, quote, after being given multiple chances to return classified documents and avoid prosecution, Mr. Trump allegedly did the opposite. He not only refused to return the documents for many months, but he also obstructed justice by enlisting others to destroy evidence and then to lie about it, close quote. Why did the president charge former President Trump but not President Biden? Not because of some vast conspiracy, not because the so-called deep state was out to get him, but because former President Trump was fundamentally incapable of taking advantage of even one of the many, many chances he was given to avoid those charges. Which brings me to the second distinction this report helps us draw between President Biden and Donald Trump. Simply put, President Biden had the mental acuity to navigate this situation. Donald Trump did not. Much has been made of the special counsel's gratuitous comments about the President Biden's age. But let's set the context. After returning every classified document, after opening his home to federal investigators, while simultaneously managing the first hours of the crisis in Israel, President Biden volunteered to sit through a 5-hour interview with the special counsel. I believe, as is his habit, that President Biden probably committed a verbal slip or two during the interview. And I'm not sure any of that matters, because when the interview was over, Mr. Hur completely exonerated President Biden. And then there is Donald Trump. What kind of man bungles not one, but dozens of opportunities to avoid criminal liability? What must that say about his mental state? Here, too, the record speaks for itself.
One of the great memories of all time. James Webb. I don't remember the names. Don't remember the name.
Viktor Orban. Did anyone ever hear of him? He's the leader of Turkey.
By the way, they never report the crowd on January 6th. You know, Nikki Haley is in charge of security.
3 years later, how about that?
Did you actually have a one-on-one with Comey then?
And not much, not even that I remember. I like Besitos.
We have languages coming into our country. We have nobody that even speaks those languages. They're truly foreign languages. Nobody speaks them. Saudi Arabia and Russia will repeat your... Oh.
I have a really good memory.
Your next wife was a woman by the name of Marla Maples.
That's right.
Do you recall what years you were married to Ms. Maples?
It's called like Up Here, and it's called Memory, and it's called other things.
So you don't remember saying you have one of the best memories?
I don't remember that.
And Putin, has so little respect for Obama that he's starting to throw around the nuclear word today. You've heard that, nuclear.
We have to win in November, or we're not going to have Pennsylvania. They'll change the name.
I talked to Putin a lot.
Did you ask him that?
I don't remember that. I saw that this morning. I don't remember asking him that question. I have a good memory and all that stuff, like a great memory.
For 20 years, they were fighting ISIS. I defeated ISIS in 4 weeks.
And we did with Obama. We won an election that everyone said couldn't be won.
I'm not cognitively. And you know what? When I am, you're going to know it. You're going to be the first people. I know my people. You'll say, all right, Trump, you did a good job. Get the hell out of here. That's it.
That is a man who is incapable of avoiding criminal liability, a man who is wholly unfit for office, and a man who, at the very least, ought to think twice before accusing others of cognitive decline. Thank you for being here today, Mr. Hur. Thank you for illuminating a stark choice for this country in the months to come. I look forward to your testimony, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the chairman of the Oversight Committee, Mr. Comer, for an opening statement.
Thank you. In August 2022, President Biden questioned in a 60 Minutes interview how anyone can be that irresponsible when asked about classified documents in the possession of former President Trump. But when President Biden said this, he knew that he had stashed classified materials in several unsecured locations for years, dating back to his time as vice president and even as a U.S. senator. President Biden, the White House, and his personal attorneys have not been honest with the American people about his willful retention of classified material and continue to hide information from Congress. President Biden's attorneys claim to have first discovered classified material at Penn Biden Center on November 2nd, 2022. However, President Biden and his lawyers kept it secret from the American people before the midterm elections. CBS News broke the story in January 2023, leaving Americans to wonder if the White House had any intention of ever disclosing that President Biden hoarded classified documents for years. One of my first actions after becoming chairman of the House Oversight Committee was to launch an investigation into President Biden's mishandling of classified documents. This investigation started before Special Counsel Hur was named, and what we found is alarming. Information obtained through multiple transcribed interviews conducted by the Oversight Committee contradict the White House's and President Biden's personal attorney's narrative about the discovery of classified documents at the Penn Biden Center. In fact, The real timeline began in the spring of 2021, not November 2022, as the White House claimed. Additionally, the classified documents were not kept in a locked closet, as asserted by the White House. We've also learned that 5 White House employees and a Department of Defense employee were involved in the early stages of coordinating the organizing, moving, and removing of boxes that were later found to contain classified materials. There's no reasonable explanation as to why so many White House employees were concerned with retrieving boxes they believed only contained personal documents and materials. Why did President Biden keep these specific documents in unsecure locations for years? Many questions remain, but now the White House is obstructing Congress as we seek the truth for the American people. We've subpoenaed former White House counsel Dana Remus to appear for a deposition to provide information to our committee, but the White House is seeking to block her testimony. We've also subpoenaed the Department of Justice for audio recordings and transcript of President Biden's interview with Special Counsel Hur. These were due the morning of the State of the Union. Only this morning, a couple of hours before today's hearing, the Department of Justice finally provided the transcript of President Biden's interview with Special Counsel Hur. The timing is not coincidental. Although we've had little time to review the transcripts, from what we have seen, it is clear that the White House did not want Special Counsel Hur's final report to be released. The White House has refused to be transparent with the American people about the president's mishandling of classified documents. And worse, they have appeared to have lied about the timeline, about who handled the documents, and even about the contents of President Biden's interview with Special Counsel Hur. That is why today's hearing is important. Transparency is what we seek today, and we look forward to Special Counsel Hur's testimony. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the ranking member of the Oversight Committee, Mr. Raskin, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Jordan. There are just 3 basic points that all Americans need to understand about Mr. Hur's report. Number 1, the special counsel exonerates President Biden. The very first line of the report says it all, quote, "We conclude that no criminal charges are warranted in this matter. We would reach the same conclusion even if Department of Justice policy did not foreclose criminal charges against a sitting president." Second, the report establishes that President Biden offered complete and unhesitating cooperation with the special counsel's investigation. The Justice Department and the National Archives were proactively notified of the classified documents, and they were turned over. The president allowed the FBI to search his homes, and he sat for a voluntary interview for more than 5 hours on October 8th and October 9th, even as he was busy responding to Hamas's vicious terrorist attack in Israel. The report thus demonstrates President Biden's complete devotion to the rule of law and his respect for a fair and independent Department of Justice. President Biden did not assert executive privilege or claim absolute immunity for presidential crimes. He did not hide boxes of documents under his bed or in a bathtub. He did not fight investigators, nor did he seek to redact a single word of Mr. Hur's report. He consented to the search of numerous locations, including his homes, and he did everything he could to cooperate, not obstruct. Third, Special Counsel Hur repeatedly emphasizes that President Biden's conduct contrasts sharply with that of former President Trump. Hur observes that unlike President Biden, quote, "The allegations set forth in the indictment of Mr. Trump, if proven, would clearly establish not only Mr. Trump's willfulness, but also serious aggravating factors." He sets forth these points of difference in detail, quote, "Most notably, after being given multiple chances to return classified documents and avoid prosecution, Trump allegedly did the opposite. According to the indictment, he not only refused to return the documents for months, but he also obstructed justice by enlisting others to destroy evidence and then to lie about it," unquote. He returned only a portion of subpoenaed documents and deliberately withheld the rest. Unlike President Biden, Trump did not alert the National Archives or DOJ of the documents, nor did he turn over all the classified materials in his possession. He did not agree to sit down for a voluntary interview with the special counsel. He never consented to a search of his home. On the contrary, Trump suggested that his attorney hide or destroy evidence requested by the FBI and the grand jury. Trump carefully instructed his aide to move boxes of classified documents to hide them from the FBI. Trump tried to delete incriminating security tape footage from Mar-a-Lago, and he got his attorney to provide a false certification to the FBI saying he had produced all the documents in his possession. He did not. Given that this report is so damning in the contrast between Biden and Trump, it is hard for me to see why our colleagues think that this hearing advances their flailing and embarrassing quest to impeach the President of the United States. What America sees today is evidence of one president who believes in the rule of law and works to protect it, and one who has nothing but contempt for the rule of law and acts solely in pursuit of his own constantly multiplying corrupt schemes. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Without objection, all other opening statements will be included in the record. We will now introduce today's witness. The Honorable Robert Hur was appointed as a special counsel in January 2023 to investigate the removal and retention of classified documents discovered at the Penn Biden Center for Diplomacy and Global Engagement. He previously served as the Principal Associate Deputy Attorney General at the Department of Justice and as the United States Attorney for the District of Maryland. He was a law clerk for Chief Justice William Rehnquist and also clerked for Judge Alex Kaczynski on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. We welcome our witness and thank him for appearing today. We will begin by swearing you in. Mr. Hur, would you please stand? Raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief, so help you God? Let the record reflect that the witness has answered in the affirmative. Thank you, and you can be seated. Please know that your written testimony will be entered into the record in its entirety. Accordingly, we ask that you summarize your testimony. Mr. Hur, you may begin with your opening statement. Make sure you got that mic on, if you could, Mr. Hur. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman Jordan, Ranking Member Nadler, Chairman Comer, Ranking Member Raskin, members of the committee, good morning. I'm privileged to have served our country for the majority of my career, a decade and a half, most of those years with the Department of Justice. I have served as a line prosecutor, a supervisor, the Principal Associate Deputy Attorney General, a United States Attorney, and a special counsel. I've served in these roles with gratitude as the son of immigrants to this country, the first member of my family to be born here. My parents grew up in Korea and were young children during the Korean War. My father remembers being hungry and grateful for the food that American GIs shared with him and his siblings. My mother fled what is now North Korea in her own mother's arms, heading south to safety. My parents eventually met, married, and came to the US, seeking a better life for themselves and for their children. Their lives and mine would have been very different were it not for this country. No matter the role, no matter the administration, I have applied the same standards and the same impartiality. My respect for the Justice Department and my commitment to this country are why I agreed to serve as special counsel when asked by the Attorney General. I resolved to do the work as I did all my work for the department, fairly, thoroughly, and professionally, with close attention to the policies and practices that govern department prosecutors. My team and I conducted a thorough, independent investigation. We identified evidence that the president willfully retained classified materials after the end of his vice presidency when he was a private citizen. This evidence included an audio-recorded conversation during which Mr. Biden told his ghostwriter that he had, quote, just found all the classified stuff downstairs, end quote. When Mr. Biden said this, he was a private citizen speaking to his ghostwriter in his private rental home in Virginia. We also identified other recorded conversations during which Mr. Biden read classified information aloud to his ghostwriter. We did not, however, identify evidence that rose to the level of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Because the evidence fell short of that standard, I declined to recommend criminal charges against Mr. Biden. The department's regulations required me to write a confidential report explaining my decision to the Attorney General. I understood that my explanation about this case had to include rigorous, detailed, and thorough analysis. In other words, I needed to show my work, just as I would expect any prosecutor to show his or her work explaining the decision to prosecute or not. The need to show my work was especially strong here. The Attorney General had appointed me to investigate the actions of the Attorney General's boss, the sitting President of the United States. I knew that for my decision to be credible, I could not simply announce that I recommended no criminal charges and leave it at that. I needed to explain why. My report reflects my best effort to explain why I declined to recommend charging President Biden. I analyzed the evidence as prosecutors routinely do, by assessing its strengths and weaknesses, including by anticipating the ways in which the president's defense lawyers might poke holes in the government's case, if there were a trial, and seek to persuade jurors that the government could not prove his guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. There has been a lot of attention paid to language in the report about the president's memory, so let me say a few words about that. My task was to determine whether the president retained or disclosed national defense information willfully. That means knowingly and with the intent to do something the law forbids. I could not make that determination without assessing the president's state of mind. For that reason, I had to consider the president's memory and overall mental state and how a jury likely would perceive his memory and mental state in a criminal trial. These are the types of issues that prosecutors analyze every day. And because these issues were important to my ultimate decision, I had to include a discussion of them in my report to the Attorney General. The evidence and the president himself put his memory squarely at issue. We interviewed the president and asked him about his recorded statement. Quote, "I just found all the classified stuff downstairs," end quote. He told us that he didn't remember saying that to his ghostwriter. He also said he didn't remember finding any classified material in his home after his vice presidency. And he didn't remember anything about how classified documents about Afghanistan made their way into his garage. My assessment in the report about the relevance of the president's memory was necessary and accurate and fair. Most importantly, what I wrote is what I believe the evidence shows and what I expect jurors would perceive and believe. I did not sanitize my explanation, nor did I disparage the president unfairly. I explained to the Attorney General my decision and the reasons for it. That's what I was required to do. I took the same approach when I compared the evidence regarding President Biden to the department's allegations against former President Trump. There, too, I called it like I saw it. As a prosecutor, I had to consider relevant precedents and to explain why different facts justify different outcomes. That is what I did in my report. I'm confident the analysis set forth in chapters 11, 12, and 13 of my report provides a thorough evaluation and explanation of the evidence, and I encourage everyone to read it to inform their opinions of the report. Prosecutors rarely write public reports or testify about their investigations. That is the Justice Department's long-standing policy, and it protects important interests. My team and I prepared the report to the Attorney General with care, and the report stands as the primary source of information. My responses today will be limited to clarifying information for the committee. I will refrain from speculating or commenting on areas outside the scope of the investigation, nor will I discuss what investigative steps we did or did not take beyond what's in the report. In conclusion, I want to express my heartfelt thanks to the attorneys, agents, analysts, and professional staff who helped us do our work fairly, thoroughly, and independently. I am grateful and privileged to have served with them. I single out for particular thanks Deputy Special Counsel Mark Crickbaum, a former United States Attorney himself, who brought great wisdom, skill, and judgment to our task. Thank you. I welcome your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hur. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from North Dakota for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. How could that possibly happen? How could anyone be that irresponsible? And I thought, what data was in there that could compromise sources, methods, and it's just totally irresponsible? That is President Biden's statement about Donald Trump and the classified documents. Now, Mr. Hur, classified documents were found at the Penn Biden Center?
That's correct.
They were found in President Biden's garage?
In Wilmington, Delaware, yes.
And in his basement den?
Also in the same home, yes.
In his main floor office?
Correct.
And his third floor den?
Correct.
At the University of Delaware?
Correct.
And at the Biden Institute?
Correct.
All right. And the elements of the crime for this, I mean, we get into all of this, but the elements of the crime are pretty simple, right? President Biden had unauthorized possession of a document, writing, or note. That's correct.
Correct.
And that the document, writing, or note related to national defense.
Correct.
and that the defendant, and we may talk about the willfully part here in a second, retained the document, writing, or note and failed to deliver it to an employee or officer entitled to receive it.
Correct. There is a willfulness intent element, as you say.
But those are the elements of the crime.
Including the intent element, yes.
And there are at least two different quotes, right, where he told his ghostwriter, and this is in your report, in a matter of fact, and this is February 16, 2017, that he had just found all this classified stuff downstairs.
He did make that statement that was captured on an audio recording.
And on April 10th, 2017, Biden read aloud a classified passage related to a 2015 meeting in the Situation Room.
That is in the report, yes.
And these are national security documents. Afghanistan, has been mentioned, a whole bunch of those things, right?
Correct.
And at one point in time, his personal attorneys and the DOJ attorneys argued about notes, taking all of the different things and compared it to Reagan.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that, Congressman?
President Biden's attorneys, personal attorneys, talked about the notes and why they didn't actually account for the Presidential Records Act. But you found that argument in your report. It seems a little persuasive, but you eventually said no, the executive order trumps, right?
We did set forth an analysis of the governing law and ultimately concluded that the executive order 13526 does apply and did govern former Vice President Biden at the time.
So you have audio recording from his ghostwriter where the president acknowledges that the information he has is classified and he's sharing with his ghostwriter.
We have an audio recording capturing a statement from Mr. Biden saying to his ghostwriter in February of 2017, quote, "I just found all the classified stuff downstairs," end quote.
And then again reciting passages from a meeting in the Situation Room.
Yes.
And those are in President Biden's own words.
Correct.
Right, so and the ghostwriter has no classified, he has no clearance, no classified clearance to anything, correct?
That is our understanding, that Mr. Zwanitzer was not authorized to receive classified information.
Okay, so the elements are possessed documents, the documents related to national defense, and willfully retained those documents, and in this case, shared them with somebody who was not allowed to receive them.
There are different subsections of 18 U.S.C. 793. One subsection relates to the willful retention, and another relates to disclosure of national defense information.
Well, the willful retention, we've got the Penn Biden Center, the garage, the basement den, the main floor office, the third floor den, the University of Delaware, and the Biden Institute. We have a 50-year career of a person who has not been very great at dealing with classified documents throughout, even prior to his time as vice president, when he was in the U.S. Senate, right?
We do address each set of those documents in the report, Congressman.
So the difference, but I think this is really important because the difference is it appears just from reading the report, and we heard all about exonerated and all of those different things. It appears from the report he met every actual element of the crime. So I want to talk about the department principles on federal prosecution, because that actually has nothing to do with the underlying elements, correct? It's whether or not you can prove this at trial.
Under the department's justice manual and the principles of federal prosecution, a prosecutor has to assess the evidence and determine whether, in his or her judgment, the probable outcome will be a conviction at trial.
So whether or not you meet the elements of the crime, which I think it's clear that he does, the second part of this is this, and that's where it gets into the sympathetic, well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory. You could have just said we don't prosecute sitting presidents, but you did not. And you entered this, but that doesn't have anything to do with the actual elements of the crime. That has to do with getting a conviction at trial, correct?
Well, Congressman, part and parcel of a prosecutor's judgment as to whether or not a conviction is the probable outcome of trial is assessing how the evidence identified during the investigation lines up with the elements and what proof can be offered to a jury during a trial.
Sure, but his well-meaning elderly old man has nothing to do with the underlying elements of the crime.
Well, it certainly has
it's a presentation to the jury.
It certainly has something.
Gentleman can respond.
It certainly has something to do with the way that a jury is going to perceive and receive and consider and make conclusions based on evidence at trial, Congressman.
Time the gentleman has expired. The chair now recognizes the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee, Mr. Nadler.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hur, in your written testimony, you say that you found some evidence that the president might have willfully retained classified materials at the end of his vice presidency, correct?
Correct.
But ultimately, you concluded that you could not prove that charge in a court of law. In your words, you, quote, did not identify evidence that rose to the level of proof beyond a reasonable doubt, close quote, correct?
That was my judgment.
You have been a prosecutor for a long time, Mr. Hur. Would you agree that there's no such thing as being a little bit charged for a crime? You're either charged or you're not, correct?
Could you please repeat the question, Congressman?
Would you agree that there's no such thing as being a little bit charged for a crime? You're either charged or you are not charged, correct?
Yes, it is binary. Either one is not
Thank
charged
you.
or charged.
So just to be clear, because so many people have taken your words out of context, your ultimate conclusion was that President Biden could not be charged with a crime because even after your thorough investigation, you could not find sufficient evidence to charge him, correct?
My conclusion was that based on my evaluation of the evidence, as a prosecutor...
Don't feel buzz, correct?
I'm sorry, Congressman, I didn't hear your last question.
I said, based on your conclusion, your ultimate conclusion is that President Biden could not be charged with a crime because even after your thorough investigation, you could not find sufficient evidence to charge him. Correct or not correct?
My ultimate conclusion was that criminal charges were not warranted.
Correct. Now let's talk about why. I have limited time, so please, when I say correct or not correct, answer the question. Now let's talk about why, in sharp contrast to President Biden, President Trump faces 40 charges related to the unlawful retention of highly classified documents. That is, of course, apart from the additional 51 counts in cases alleging that he incited a rebellion and lied about his finances. You found that President Biden reported the possible classified documents in his possession to the FBI as soon as he learned of them, correct?
There was a voluntary disclosure by the President's counsel to authorities relating to the discovery of classified documents at the Penn Biden.
Let's contrast this with President Trump. Are you aware that the FBI only learned that Trump was in possession of classified material after the National Archives discovered them?
Congressman, I am not intimately familiar with the facts relating to former President Trump. I'm prepared to comment on them to the extent that I address them in the report.
You write in your report that President Biden, quote, would not have handed the government classified documents from his own home on a silver platter if he had willfully retained those documents for years, close quote. In other words, part of understanding President Biden's intent was that he quickly and voluntarily returned those documents to the government, correct?
That was a factor in our analysis, yes.
Thank you. By way of contrast, to the best of your knowledge, why did the Department of Justice seek a warrant to search Mar-a-Lago?
Congressman, I am not familiar with those deliberations. That is a matter that I had no participation
Well,
in.
I'll tell you, it was because they were concerned that Trump had lied about possession of those documents and might conceal or destroy them. Special Counsel Smith found that President Trump obstructed his investigation by suggesting that his attorney falsely represent to the FBI and grand jury that Trump did not have the documents called for by the grand jury subpoena. At any point in your investigation, did you have any reason to believe that President Biden lied to you?
I do address in my report one response the President gave to a question that we had posed to him that we deemed to be not credible.
Was it clear he didn't lie?
I'm sorry, Congressman.
The report is clear that he didn't lie, or that he caused his staff to lie to you, and that he didn't cause his staff to lie to you. Your report is clear on that. You agree that causing someone to lie to the FBI is a classic example of obstruction of justice?
It is an example of obstruction, yes.
Thank you. Trump also obstructed the Smith investigation by directing one of his employees to move boxes of documents to conceal them from Trump's attorney, from the FBI, and from the grand jury. At any point in your investigation, did you find that President Biden directed his staff to conceal documents from you or anyone else?
We did not reach that
Okay.
conclusion.
You would agree that hiding documents is a classic example of obstructing an investigation?
It is an example of obstruction.
Thank you. Donald Trump instructed his staff to delete security footage so that the FBI and special counsel could not see how he had tried to move and hide documents. Do you agree that attempting to delete video footage in this manner is plainly an attempt to obstruct an investigation?
Congressman, I don't want to characterize the evidence in the case against former
But
President.
if that happened, would you agree that deleting video footage is plainly an attempt to obstruct an investigation?
Congressman, it's the type of evidence that prosecutors would consider.
To sum up, Donald Trump is charged with willfully retaining classified documents and conspiring to conceal those documents, and he's facing additional charges for lying to investigators. Isn't that correct?
Those are allegations that are in a pending
Matter of
indictment
public
against
record.
former President Trump.
And the reason why President Biden is not facing a single charge, Mr. Hur, is not because you went easy on him, but because after reviewing 7 million documents and interviewing nearly 150 witnesses, including the president himself, you could not prove that he had committed a crime. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from, Mr. McClintock, gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you. Mr. Hur, I first want to get this straight. Is it now okay if I take home top secret documents, store them in my garage, and read portions of them to friends or associates?
Congressman, I wouldn't recommend it, but I don't want to entertain any hypotheticals at this point.
Was it okay? I mean, I can do that now under this new doctrine?
Again, Congressman, I wouldn't recommend that you do that, but
Well, you've essentially said so in your report, and certainly it would be exculpatory if I simply told you, hey, I'm getting old, I don't remember stuff the way I used to.
Congressman, I'm not here to get into hypotheticals. I'm here to talk about the facts and the work that I did.
It was not a hypothetical. This is the issue at hand. You correctly noted in your report that former presidents and other senior officials have been given wide latitude in their possession of classified information, and I believe your decision not to prosecute Biden for the same offense is consistent with that precedent. But the problem is that precedent changed with the administration's decision to prosecute Donald Trump. And the irony is that as president, Trump had full discretion over handling classified material and full discretion in deciding which records to retain. As a senator or vice president, Joe Biden didn't have that. So now we get to this glaring double standard. I think it would be toxic to the rule of law on its face if it was just two ordinary citizens. But the fact that the only person being prosecuted for this offense happens to be the president's political opponent makes this an unprecedented assault on our democracy. This is the worst we could expect from a banana republic. And I wonder how you square this.
Congressman, I do address, as I was required to as a prosecutor, a relevant precedent in the form of the allegations in the indictment against former President Trump. I set forth my explanation and my assessment and comparison of those precedents in my report, and I am not here to comment any further beyond what's in my report.
You said, for example, that there was no evidence beyond reasonable doubt. Well, you got the fact that he had classified material in his possession and control in multiple settings for multiple years, that he told others he was aware of this, and that he shared that material with others. The mind boggles at what beyond reasonable doubt would actually mean.
Well, as I set forth at length in my explanations in chapters 11 and 12 of the report, my assessment is that the evidence, if presented at trial alongside potential defense arguments, would not probably result in a conviction at trial.
Well, that's one of the points you make, is that President Biden's likely to be an elderly, sympathetic figure with a poor memory. But how does that bear on any individual's guilt or innocence? Isn't that, again, a question for a judge or jury to decide after guilt or innocence is determined?
It is.
And again, here's the problem. Donald Trump's being prosecuted for exactly the same act that you've documented that Joe Biden committed.
Congressman, if I understood your question correctly, you said, isn't that a question for a jury? And it most certainly, through the lens of
my question is, does that bear on the guilt or innocence of an individual?
It certainly bears on how a jury is going to receive and perceive and make decisions.
So the answer to my earlier question is correct. All I have to do when I'm caught taking home classified materials to say, I'm sorry, Mr. Herbert, but I'm getting old. My memory's not so great.
Yeah. Congressman,
this is the doctrine that you've established in our laws now, and it's frightening.
Congressman, my intent is certainly not to establish any sort of doctrine. I had a particular task. I have a particular set of evidence to consider and make a judgment with respect to one particular set of evidence, and that is what I did.
Well, Mr. Hur, here's the fine point of the matter. The foundation of our justice system is equal justice under law. That's what gives the law its respect and its legitimacy. And without it, the law is simply force, devoid of any moral authority. Justice is depicted as blindfolded for this very reason. It doesn't matter who comes before her. All are treated equally. You destroy this foundation, and the rule of law becomes a sick mockery. It becomes a weapon to wield against political rivals and a tool of despotism. And I am desperately afraid that this decision of the Department of Justice is now crossed a very bright line. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back.
Chairman, I ask for unanimous consent to introduce the State of the Union into the hearing.
Without objection, that'll be introduced. The ranking member is recognized for unanimous consent.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent that a copy of an article in this morning's Washington Post entitled "Full Transcript of Biden's Special Counsel Interview Paints Nuanced Portrait. The President doesn't come across as absent-minded as Hur has made him out to be."
Without objection.
Thank you.
Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from California for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Hur, for being here today. I found your report very interesting, and I learned some things about it. The law and the precedents. There are clear differences between the cases and precedents set by Presidents Reagan, Trump, and Biden. Now, it was widely known that President Reagan kept diaries from his presidency that included classified information. What I didn't know and learned in your report was that the Department of Justice, quote, repeatedly described the diaries in public court filings as Mr. Reagan's personal records, unquote, and that no agency ever attempted to remove his diaries. That's on page 195 of your report. Very interesting. So the investigation found that President Biden believed that his notebooks were his personal property, including work and political notes, reflections, to-do lists, and more that he was entitled to take home. You found that on page 232. So while much of his notebook was work-related, he still had some purely personal subjects like, again, I quote, gut-wrenching entities about the illness and death of his son, Beau, and that's on page 82 and 253 of your report. So it's clear, based on the Reagan precedent, that no criminal charges were warranted in this matter relative to personal notebooks. Now, I want to be clear that although the notebooks contain some very personal information and President Biden considered them his personal property, the president allowed your team to seize and review all of the notebooks you found. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Now, that's in stark contrast to ex-President Trump's case. He obstructed and diverted all the investigations. Now, you also interviewed President Biden about other classified documents you found outside his notebooks, didn't you?
Yes, Congresswoman.
So did the president tell you that he believed any documents other than his own handwritten work were his personal property? Yes or no?
We did not hear that from the president during his interview.
So again, it's very different from ex-President Trump. Ex-President Trump said all of the documents marked classified were his personal property. President Biden did not consider documents that were produced by other entities with classification markings as his personal records. Now, I think, since the majority has tried to assert that there is a disparity based on politics in the differences in the prosecution, it's worth quoting page 11 of the report, which says, and I quote, "Several material distinctions between Mr. Trump's case and Mr. Biden's case are clear. Most notably, after being given multiple chances to return classified documents and avoid prosecution, Mr. Trump allegedly did the opposite. According to the indictment, he not only refused to return the documents for many months, but he also obstructed justice by enlisting others to destroy evidence and then to lie about it." That's on page 11. Quote, "In contrast, Mr. Biden turned in classified documents to the National Archives and the Department of Justice, consented to the search of multiple locations, including his homes, sat for a voluntary interview, and in other ways cooperated with the investigation." It's clear that these cases are not the same. And frankly, I was surprised to learn that some of the classified documents were actually personal diaries that many executive officials have taken home with them because it was in their own handwriting, it was what they produced. And based on the Department of Justice public statements during the Reagan administration, it is understandable that a person could believe that their personal diaries that they produced were not to be turned over, just as President Reagan did not turn them over. So I appreciate your report. I appreciate your being here, Mr. Hur. And I would also like to ask, Mr. Chairman, a unanimous request to include in the record a September 11th letter from the Special Counsel to the President to Special Counsel Hur, and also a letter to Merrick Garland.
Without objection.
And with that, Mr. Chairman, I see my time has expired, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The chair is recognized. Mr. Hur, why did he do it? Why did Joe Biden, in your words, willfully retain and disclose classified materials? I mean, he knew the law. Been in office like 50 years. 5 decades in the United States Senate, chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, 8 years as vice president. He got briefed every day as vice president. He's been in the Situation Room. In fact, you know he knew the rules because you said so on page 226. President Biden was deeply familiar with the measures taken to safeguard classified documents. And Joe Biden told us he knew the rules. Mr. Armstrong said this earlier. Joe Biden was deeply familiar with it. You're exactly right, because he told us when Jack Smith goes after President Trump, Joe Biden says, how could this happen? What data was in those documents that could compromise sources and methods? It's irresponsible. So Joe Biden knew the rules. You know he knew the rules. And Joe Biden told us he knew the rules. So, Mr. Hur, why did he break them?
Congressman, the conclusion as to exactly why the president did what he did is not one that we explicitly address in the report. The report explains my decision to the Attorney General that no criminal charges were warranted in this manner.
I think you did tell us. I think you told us, Mr. Hur. Page 231, you said this. President Biden had strong motivations. That's a key word. We're getting to motive now. President Biden had strong motivations to ignore the proper procedures for safeguarding the classified information in his notebooks. Why did he have strong motivations? Because, next word, because he decided months before leaving office to write a book. To write a book. That was his motive. He knew the rules. He broke them because he was writing a book. And you further say, and he began meeting with the ghostwriter while he was still vice president. There's the motive. Mr. Hur, how much did President Biden get paid for his book?
Off the top of my head, I'm not sure if that information appears in the report.
It sure does. There's a dollar amount in there. You remember?
I don't. It may be $8 million. If that's
$8 million. Joe Biden had 8 million reasons to break the rules. Took classified information and shared it with the guy who was writing the book. That's why he did. He knew the rules, but he broke them for $8 million in a book advance. But you know what? It wasn't just the money. Joe Biden, here's this page 231, very next page. Joe Biden, in your report, Joe Biden viewed his notebooks as an irreplaceable, contemporaneous record of the most important moments of his vice presidency. He had written this all down for the book, for the $8 million. And the next thing you say in your report is, quote, such a record would buttress his legacy as a world leader. You know what this is? It wasn't just the money. It wasn't just $8 million. It was also his ego. Pride and money is why he knowingly violated the rules. The oldest motives in the book, pride and money. You agree with that, Mr. Hur? You wrote it in your report.
That language, and it does appear in the report, and we did identify evidence supporting those assessments.
You also had another interesting statement in your report. You said Joe Biden, I want to make sure I get this right, viewed himself as a man of presidential timber. Remember that statement, Mr. Hur?
I believe that does appear in the report, at least in the executive summary.
I think this is interesting, because here's the scary part. Page 200. I said this earlier in my opening statement. Page 200, Joe Biden, this is a quote, Joe Biden risked serious damage to America's national security when he shared information with his ghostwriter. Shared it with his ghostwriter, the guy who was helping Joe Biden get $8 million. And oh, by the way, Mr. Hur, What did that ghostwriter do with the information Joe Biden shared with him on his laptop? What did he do after you were named special counsel?
Chairman, if you're referring to the audio recordings that Mr. Zwanitzer created of his conversations with
Exactly
Mr. Biden,
what I'm referring to.
He slid, if I remember correctly, he slid those files into his recycle bin on his computer.
Tried to destroy the evidence, didn't he?
Correct.
The very guy who was helping Joe Biden get the $8 million Joe Biden had used, the motive for Joe Biden to disclose classified information, to retain classified information, which he definitely knew was against the law. When you get named special counsel, what's that guy do? He destroys the evidence. That's the key takeaway in my mind. That's the key takeaway. I yield back. Is it Mr. Raskin? Gentleman from Maryland for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hur, your report starts with the line, "We conclude that no criminal charges are warranted in this matter." Have you had any reason to change your opinion about that?
No, Congress. No, Ranking Member.
You highlight the independence and support you got from the Attorney General and DOJ. Have you changed your mind about that?
I have not.
The report describes President Biden's cooperation in your requests. He allowed his homes to be searched. He answered questions for hours in the midst of a global crisis. Have you had any reason to change your mind about that?
No, Ranking Member.
All right. You also repeatedly contrast Biden's cooperation with the conduct of Donald Trump. You say, quote, "Most notably, after being given multiple chances to return classified documents and avoid prosecution, Mr. Trump allegedly did the opposite. According to the indictment, he not only refused to return the documents for many months, but he also obstructed justice by enlisting others to destroy evidence and then to lie about it." Have you any reason to change your judgment about the differences between President Biden's cooperation and the former president's non-cooperation?
No, I continue to stand by those words in my report.
With such a striking contrast, our colleagues have switched over from being impeachment investigators for constitutional high crimes and misdemeanors, which is how this whole thing started, to being amateur memory specialists, giving us their drive-by diagnoses of the President of the United States, whose soaring oratory, powerful historical analysis, and devastating extemporaneous repartee with even the most skilled ninja hecklers of the Freedom Caucus were on full display at the State of the Union address last week for the whole country to see. The desperate quest to invent an issue is a distraction from the 91 federal and state federal charges that Donald Trump faces now, his staggering civil court losses in New York now totaling more than $500 million, and his full-blown embrace and romance with authoritarian dictators and communist tyrants all over the world, from Viktor Orban in Hungary to Vladimir Putin in Russia, the former head of the KGB, to the communist dictator of North Korea. It's not, this, my friends, this is a memory test. But it's not a memory test for President Biden. It's a memory test for all of America. Do we remember fascism? Do we remember Nazism? Do we remember communism and totalitarianism? Have we completely forgotten the sacrifices of our parents and grandparents in prior generations? While we play pin the tail on the donkey in this wild goose chase, all of these silly games, Donald Trump entertains authoritarian hustler Viktor Orban at Mar-a-Lago for the weekend, and Orban comes out to declare that if we indeed sleepwalk into another Trump presidency, Trump will, quote, not give a single penny to Ukraine. That's what all of this is about. It's about trying to pull the wool over the eyes of America, because the tyrants and dictators of the world are on the march today. So who wins with this ludicrous, embarrassing spectacle? Orban wins, Putin wins, Xi wins, the tyrants of the world win. They have one more reason to celebrate Donald Trump and his cult followers, who've completely lost their way. They're looking for high crimes and misdemeanors. Now they appoint themselves amateur memory specialists, and that's what they pounce on the President of the United States about. America faces a choice between democracy and tyranny. And the president laid it out at Valley Forge, and he laid it out in the State of the Union. Will America stand on the side of people struggling against fascist aggression? Will we stand with the people of Ukraine against Vladimir Putin, whose filthy war has meant the kidnapping of thousands of Ukrainian children, the murder, the slaughter of thousands of Ukrainian civilians, and the attack on an independent sovereign democracy? But we're not working on that today. We're not standing up for democracy and human rights and international law around the world. No, we're trying to play memory detectives, to parse the language of a president who the whole world got to see at the State of the Union address directly address the real questions of our time. And it is democracy versus dictatorship. And all of the autocrats and the theocrats, all of the kleptocrats of the world are together in league against American democracy, and we have to stand up for American democracy against these stupid games. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. The chairman of the Oversight Committee, Mr. Comer, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. During the Oversight Committee interviews, we've identified a number of White House employees who were involved in the mishandling of classified documents under the leadership of President Biden. Special Counsel Hur, can you please tell us approximately how many current and former White House employees you interviewed related to your investigation?
Chairman Comer, I don't have that figure immediately at hand. Of course, it was a subset of the 173 interviews that we conducted during our investigation.
Your report indicates that one of those former White House employees who you interviewed was Dana Remus. Is that correct?
We did interview Ms. Remus.
Ms. Remus was President Biden's former White House counsel, correct?
She was President Obama's former White House counsel.
I'm sorry, President Obama's White House counsel. Yes. Related to Ms. Remus, in your report on page 257, you wrote, in May 2022, White House counsel Dana Remus undertook an effort to retrieve Mr. Biden's files from the Penn Biden Center. Remus described the original purpose of that effort as gathering materials to prepare for potential congressional inquiries about the Biden family's activities during the period from 2017 to 2019. Now, it seems odd to me that Dana Remus and Joe Biden's personal lawyers were obtaining documents related to potential congressional inquiries about the Biden family activities when Joe Biden has publicly claimed he had no involvement with his family's business dealings. Can you provide more information about why Dana Remus, a government employee, was retrieving Joe Biden's documents from the Penn Biden Center?
Chairman, I am able to tell you and clarify information that appears in the report about relevant, significant sources of information, but I am not in a position to be able to go beyond that.
When you interviewed President Biden, did you ask him what documents he possessed at Penn Biden Center that could be related to a potential congressional inquiry about his family's activities?
We asked President Biden a wealth of questions about all of the different sets of classified materials that were recovered during the course of our investigation.
Did anything pertain specifically to our congressional inquiry of President Biden that you recall?
If there are more specific aspects of it that you have in mind, Chairman, that would be helpful to me.
Interest pertaining to his family's influence peddling activities?
If it's helpful, Chairman, Appendix A does list in table chart form a brief description of all of the marked classified documents that were recovered in our investigation.
We intend to interview Ms. Remus, and the recording or transcript of your interview would be highly relevant to our future questioning of her. Can you confirm that you did, in fact, record her in your interview?
It was our practice to record the interviews that we conducted, Chairman Comer.
Additionally, in the course of the investigation, the Oversight Committee learned from a Penn Biden Center employee that Annie Tomasini, a White House employee, visited the Penn Biden Center in 2021. Did you interview Annie Tomasini in the course of your investigation?
Chairman, we do not, the report does not reflect that specific name, but what I can tell you is that the report does reflect that we interviewed the Director of Oval Office Operations, and one of the places that's reflected is footnote 973.
Okay. The Oversight Committee interviewed Kathy Chung, a Department of Defense employee and former assistant to Vice President Biden, and learned that Ms. Chung visited the Biden Penn Center in June 2022 after being contacted by White House counsel in May 2022. This was months before classified documents were allegedly found in November 2022. Did you interview Kathy Chung in the course of your investigation?
Chairman, I believe that the substance relating to the subject that you're asking about appears on page 259 of the report. And while the name Kathy Chung does not appear in the text of the report, there are references to interviews of an executive assistant, including at footnote 988.
The Oversight Committee also learned from its interviews with Penn Biden Center employees and Kathy Chung that Dana Remus, Anthony Bernal, and Ashley Williams, all at the time White House employees, then visited the Penn Biden Center on different occasions before the alleged discovery of classified materials in November 2022. Did you interview these individuals during your investigation?
We interviewed many individuals, and I can assure you, Chairman, that it was a priority of ours to interview all the relevant sources of information about these documents, how they got there, who knew about them, and who accessed them.
So again, they were all recorded, is that correct? So there would be recordings?
It was our practice to interview recordings, yes, sir.
How many White House employees visited the Penn Biden Center before classified materials were reportedly discovered there in November 2022?
I don't have
according to the White House.
Sir, I don't have an exact count of
How many visits to the Penn Biden Center were made by either White House employees or President Biden's personal attorneys before the official discovery of documents in November 2022?
I don't have that figure at hand, but that should be detailed in Chapter 14 of the report, sir.
Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentlelady from Texas is recognized for 5 minutes. Before, Mr. Hur, anytime you need a break, just if you need a break, let us know, because we're going to go a while, as you well know.
Thank you, sir.
Ms. Jackson Lee is recognized.
Mr. Hur, good morning.
Good morning.
The Republicans here asked for a lot of transcripts, but Chair Jordan has yet to release 90-plus transcripts from our interviews with those, if they are to be released to the American people, is the question. My question to you is, you decided, based on the facts, not to prosecute or indict or bring forward charges against the President of the United States, the sitting President, Joseph Biden. Is that correct?
That was my judgment.
This investigation was independent and thorough. Is that correct?
Yes.
We have heard from our Republican colleagues who are grasping at straws allegations that President Biden was treated lightly in this investigation. But just a plain reading of this report completely refutes that argument. There was no two-tiered system of justice. There was only a lack of evidence against President Biden. Mr. Hur, your office and the FBI undertook an extensive investigation into Mr. Biden's handling of classified information and of the classified documents the FBI seized, correct?
Correct.
In your investigation, you conducted 173 interviews of 147 witnesses, correct?
That is correct.
And President Biden himself was one of those witnesses, correct?
Correct.
For at least 5 hours or more.
Correct.
And President Biden engaged in this interview voluntarily.
Correct.
And the interview with President Biden lasted more than 5 hours. I've said that. That's correct?
Correct.
And the interview, and it occurred the day, which all should know, after the horrific attack, October 7th, 2023, Hamas attack in Israel, according to a letter from the White House Counsel. Is that correct?
The interview spans 2 days, October 8th and October 9th.
With the president having to be in and out to deal with an international crisis, and after the interview, he provided handwritten answers to additional questions, correct?
Congresswoman, I don't recall the president being in and out during our interview to handle the internet.
Let me go on. And President Biden allowed investigators to search his private houses. Is that correct?
He did consent to the search of his residence.
And your investigation collected 7 million documents for review in your investigation. Is that correct?
Correct.
And this included emails, text messages, photographs, videos, toll records, and other materials from both classified and unclassified sources.
Correct.
Correct? And you referred or reviewed President Biden's handwritten notes as well, correct?
Correct.
And you coordinated with the multiple government agencies to organize and complete your investigation, correct?
We consulted with numerous agencies to conduct
And that
classification
included
reviews of evidence that was seized during the investigation.
Right. And that included working with national security experts in the intelligence community to carefully analyze each classified document that was obtained?
With respect to marked classified documents, that's correct. We submitted excerpts from the former Vice President's notebooks for classification review.
And if agencies reviewed classified material and gave it different levels of classification, you classified it as a higher level for the purposes of your investigation, to be thorough, correct?
That is reflected in appendices A
Thank
and
you.
B.
The FBI requested classification review from each identified agency accordingly for documents where multiple agencies had equities. The special counsel's office used the highest level of classification identified by an agency as the current classification of the document. Let me go on. Attorney General Garland appointed you as special counsel over the matter on January 12, 2023, correct?
Correct.
He authorized you to investigate Mr. Biden's possession of the classified documents, including possible unauthorized removal and retention of classified documents or other records.
Correct.
At the Penn Biden Center, President Biden's home, Delaware, as well as any matters that arose from the initial investigation or may arise directly from the special counsel investigation. Is that correct?
I believe that accurately reflects the language of the appointment order.
So you operated an independent investigation for about a year, which you just stated that you had adequate resources to complete, in which you conducted 173 interviews, included with President Biden himself. You reviewed 7 million documents, including President Biden's personal records, and searched his home thoroughly. And in this thorough, lengthy investigation, you did not uncover enough evidence to recommend prosecution against the president. Is that correct?
That's my judgment.
And if you had found enough evidence to warrant prosecution, did you feel free, unrestrained by the Attorney General appointed by President Biden to make such a recommendation to the Attorney General?
I was aware of the Office of Legal Counsel policy right now, prohibiting sitting presidents from being charged with federal crimes. But apart from that, what I can tell you, Congresswoman, is that the investigative steps that we took were my own, the judgment was my own, and the words in the report are my own.
And you would have done so.
Regular order, Mr. Chairman.
The time of the gentlelady has expired.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to put into the record justsecurity.org, the real Robert Hur report, as unanimous consent.
Without objection. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Florida. 5 minutes.
February 8th, the White House. Question, Mr. President, why did you share classified information with your ghostwriter? The President, I did not share classified information. I did not share it. I guarantee I did not. That's not true, is it, Mr. Hur?
That is inconsistent with the findings based on the evidence in my report.
Yes, it's a lie, is just what regular people would say, right? Yeah, all right. So the next one. And all the stuff that was in my home was in filing cabinets that were either locked or able to be locked. That wasn't true either, was it?
That was inconsistent with the findings of our investigation.
Another lie, people might say, right? Because what you put in your report was among the places Mr. Biden's lawyers found classified documents in the garage was a damaged open box. So here's what I'm understanding, right? As Mr. Armstrong laid out, you find in your report that the elements of a federal criminal violation are met. But then you apply this senile cooperator theory, that because Joe Biden cooperated and the elevator doesn't go to the top floor, you don't think you get a conviction. And I actually think you get to the right answer in that. I don't think Biden should have been charged, don't think Trump should have been charged. But under the senile cooperator theory, isn't it frustrating that Biden continues to go out and lie about the basic facts of the report that lay out a federal criminal violation?
Congressman, I need to disagree with at least one thing that you said, which is that I found that all of the elements were met. One of the elements of the relevant mishandling statute is the intent element, and what my report reflects is my judgment that based on the evidence, I would not be able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt to a jury that that intent element had been met.
Right, but the reason you have that doubt is the senile cooperator theory. The fact that Joe Biden is so inept in responding that you can't prove the intent, which again, I don't quibble with that conclusion, but it's frustrating to be like, oh, well, this guy's not getting treated the same way as Trump because the elevator's not going to the top floor, so we can't prove intent. While at the same time, Biden goes out there at the White House and says, well, you know, he just blatantly lies. And what I'm trying to figure out is whether or not Biden's lying because he's still so senile, he hasn't read your report, or whether it's a little craftier and a little more devious and perhaps a little more intentional than we might otherwise think. So I also want to go to this Biden Penn Center. Like, did it give concern to you that the Biden Penn Center, where all this classified stuff was being mishandled, was being floated by foreign governments?
Congressman, we were concerned with getting to the bottom of all of the classified documents that were recovered during the course of our...
Yeah, but what bothers me is that the money that was paying for the place where the documents were being inappropriately held, it was the Chinese and it was other foreign countries. Did that play into your analysis? Did you look into the $1 billion in foreign funding sources at the Biden Center at UPenn, for example?
Congressman, we conducted a thorough, impartial, and fair investigation, and we were very, very concerned with getting to the bottom of all the relevant questions relating to the recovered documents.
Did you look into the fact that the Chinese were floating the place where this guy was keeping the documents unsecure? Yes or no?
Congressman, to the extent that we identified evidence that was relevant and significant to our investigation, we put it in our report.
Okay, well, it seemed relevant to me, maybe not to you. Another thing that seemed relevant to me is this ghostwriter, right? So the ghostwriter purposefully deletes this evidence that seems to be like show culpability of Biden's crimes, and you don't charge him. Why did you not charge the ghostwriter with obstructing justice and deleting evidence?
Well, for a number of reasons that are laid out in the report, but in brief, Congressman, yes, when we interviewed the ghostwriter, he did tell us, and I'm trying to get the exact language, that one of the things on his mind, one of the things he was aware of, was that I had been appointed special counsel and was conducting an investigation.
Right, so he didn't, just so everybody knows, the ghostwriter didn't delete the recordings just as a matter of happenstance. Ghostwriter has recordings of Biden making admissions of crimes. He then learns that you've been appointed. He then deletes the information that is the evidence, and you don't charge him.
That is reflected in the report, and one of the reasons...
Like, what does somebody have to do to get charged with obstruction of justice by you? If like deleting the evidence of crimes doesn't count, what would meet the standard?
So, Congressman, as we state in the relevant chapter of the report, one of the things that Mr. Zwanitzer did not delete was transcripts of the recordings that he had created that included inculpatory evidence relating to Mr. Biden.
Oh, so if you destroy some evidence but not other evidence, that somehow absolves you of the evidence you destroy? Like, here's what I see. Zwanniger should have been charged, wasn't. Biden and Trump should have been treated equally, they weren't. And that is the double standard that I think a lot of Americans are concerned about. I see my time's expired. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Tennessee is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hur, thank you for being here. A little confused about this hearing. Mr. Raskin laid out the big picture, what we should be concerned about, but in the more limited picture, Director Mueller had an investigation. He's our most famous recent special prosecutor, and he found sufficient evidence to say there was a connection between Russia and the Trump campaign. But it supported a criminal prosecution if he were not president. You found there was no evidence to support a criminal prosecution. And the story here is simple. President Biden identified classified documents in his home and other places and told archives about them. The Independent Department of Justice under Attorney General Merrick Garland appointed you, a former Trump political appointee, as special counsel to fully investigate these circumstances and authorized you to prosecute criminal misconduct. You declined to prosecute because you found insufficient evidence of a crime. Case closed. It makes really a perfect case where you did your job, Mr. Garland did his job, and unlike Mr. Barr, he didn't interfere. Did Mr. Garland ask you to change your report at all?
He did not, sir.
Didn't redact a thing?
No, sir.
Like Mr. Barr did, he redacted everything and made the Mueller report look like 180 degrees different than what it was. Mr. Garland did right, and you did right, and I commend each of you. The Department of Justice is independent and allows the special counsels to investigate and prosecute the facts if it's supported. Joe Biden's actions in handling of classified materials is similar to most other former presidents and vice presidents. The exception is Donald Trump. So let's start with some yes or no questions. Did you receive any pressure from Mr. Garland or his staff to make any specific factual finding or legal conclusion?
No.
Did you receive the resources necessary to carry out your duties?
Yes.
Do you have any reason to believe that you were treated differently with regard to independence or resources than other DOJ special prosecutors?
No.
Based on your experience as special counsel, do you have any reason to believe the Attorney General was improperly directing, pressuring, or interfering with Jack Smith or his work?
I do not have the basis to answer that question.
But your declination which we treat as thoughtful and apolitical, we should treat prosecutorial decisions by Jack Smith the same way, to the best of your knowledge.
Again, I really do not have the sufficient information with respect to Jack Smith's investigation to provide any comment on it.
Let me ask you this. If President Biden, in his testimony to you, knew the exact date, January 20, whatever it was, 2009, when he became vice president, and the day when he left being vice president, January the 20th, I guess the first would have been January 20th again, 2009, and then January 20 in 2017. If he knew those dates exactly right, and if he knew the exact date and the instant that Beau Biden died, would that have changed your decision to not to bring a prosecution?
Sir, I cannot engage in hypotheticals about what my decision would have been with different facts. What I did was to make a decision based on the facts and the circumstances that I was presented with, and we did identify during our investigation.
But it appears to me, and I think it would appear to the American public, that these minor discrepancies, as far as dates and after a long period of time, was not the basis. It was not the basis for your decision to decline to prosecute. It was the fact that you didn't have the facts, that he acted differently than Trump, that he voluntarily provided the documents, that he complied with the Justice Department, that he didn't try to obstruct justice. Those were the reasons you didn't prosecute him, not because he missed a few dates.
Congressman, my reasons for my declination decision are set out in my report, and I stand by the words in the report, sir.
Well, thank you. And I think I'm encompassing them in my what I'm saying to you is that it was not anything to do with his memory why he wasn't chosen to be, you chose not to indict him. It was the difference in the facts in the case and how he dealt with it. The fact is, Mr. Biden sat through 5 hours, and he did an admirable job. And he did an outstanding job in the State of the Union, laying out the case for the future of America, for the middle class, for democracy around the world, for standing up to the Russians, not bending down to them. That's what's important. Not if you can be like on the $64,000 question, assuming it was legit, and answering every single question correctly. That's not what you need to be president. To be president, you need to have values. You need to have an understanding of what values America has and needs to maintain to keep the world safe and peaceful. That's dealing with Ukraine. That's dealing with difficult people like Netanyahu in Israel to try to get something done that's correct. That's what Joe Biden does. And understanding Social Security and Medicaid are important institutions that help seniors, not senile people. I mean, I really object to that comment. People, nobody suggests he's senile, and that's disrespectful of senior people with any kind of memory disability. Lots of seniors have memory disability, but they're not senile, and to do such was shameful. Joe Biden is a competent, good president who knows American values.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from California is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hur, I'd like to start off by thanking you for a year of hard work and a comprehensive report. I'm going to try not to provide testimony, as some people on both sides are, or provide conclusions, but I do have some questions that lead me to ask you for conclusions. One question is, were there notes of the President of the United States that dated back to when he was a senator that contained classified information?
Among the documents that were recovered during our investigation were marked classified documents that dated back to when Mr. Biden was a senator.
When he was in his 30s, 40s, 50s?
I believe that's correct.
And were there documents from the time that he was vice president?
Yes.
Okay. So there's been a lot to do about, senility, non-senility, poor memory, and so on. But let's just go through something that you deal with as a prosecutor every day. You first start off with a set of initial evidence that indicates there may have been a crime. Is that right? By the time it gets to you, usually you have some evidence that there may have been a crime.
I think that is fair, yes.
Okay, and in this case, at some point during this investigation where the elements of the crime, including willfulness, were put before you and you reached a personal conclusion that either there was likely guilt or not. Is that correct? Not provable, not in front of a jury, just personal, because you have to make that decision as part of the case, correct?
Correct, and I would say I approach the task as I have been trained to as a prosecutor, which is as on an iterative basis. The investigation is always uncovering new evidence that you incorporate.
Right, so both before, during, and at the end, did you reach a conclusion, notwithstanding his current mental state of being an elderly man with a poor memory and so on, that he did in fact deliberately take documents and held them from back when he was a senator, and we're talking about your personal, not that you could prove it, but personally, did you see a pattern that goes all the way back to him being a senator of taking documents, making notes, and taking them and holding them personally?
Congressman, I viewed my task as a prosecutor in this matter to determine what I believed the evidence.
No, I appreciate that, and I'm not trying to take away from your conclusion. Some others are debating the conclusion. I'm not debating the conclusion. I just want to go through one element that I think is important. Look, you've prosecuted people in the past and failed to get a conviction. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, you're not a 1,000 perfect batting average. Okay.
I can't say that.
Yeah. So you went into cases thinking that you would succeed and you didn't. One might say you probably declined to prosecute ones that you might have either gotten a conviction or gotten a plea on. Would you say that's fair to say over your long career?
I think that's fair because I take the rules as set forth in the Justice Manual seriously.
However, I'm going to presume that you would never prosecute someone you thought was outright innocent.
Correct.
In this case, did you reach a conclusion that this man was outright innocent?
That conclusion is not reflected in my report, sir.
Right. So you did not reach that conclusion, or it would have been in your report.
I viewed my task of explaining my decision to the Attorney General as being based on my judgment and my assessment of the evidence. Would a conviction at trial be the probable outcome? And that's what's
and I just want to make sure the record is complete in that, because I think it's extremely important. You did not reach an idea that he had committed no wrong. You reached a conclusion that you would not prevail at trial and therefore did not take it forward. Is that correct?
Correct, Congressman.
Okay. I just want to go through one or two little, these are housekeeping almost. The documents that the president, then vice president, took, which included his own notes, to your knowledge, aren't those covered by the Freedom of Information Act? Potentially.
I honestly do not know, Congressman.
Aren't they covered by the Presidential Records Act, as every note and every text of the president, the vice president, and members of the cabinet are covered?
I think different folks would have different views on whether they're covered by the PRA, Congressman.
But isn't it true that he left office leaving no copies of that behind, and that alone was inconsistent with an open and transparent individual, correct?
I'm not aware of copies of those materials being left behind, Congressman.
Okay, I want to thank you, and Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you for the extra few seconds. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hur, you've led a distinguished career, earning your law degree from Stanford University, and you served as a student as executive editor of the Stanford Law Review, correct?
Correct.
Then you went on to clerk for Judge Kaczynski of the Ninth Circuit, correct?
Yes, sir.
After that, you ascended to a clerkship with then Chief Justice William Rehnquist on the United States Supreme Court, correct?
Correct.
And then you later joined the Daddy Bush Department of Justice as a special assistant to known Federalist Society member and now FBI Director Christopher Wray. Isn't that correct?
I did spend some time working for former Assistant Attorney General Christopher Wray.
And you later joined the Trump Justice Department as the Principal Associate Deputy Attorney General, working as the right-hand man for another known Federalist Society member, Rod Rosenstein. Isn't that correct?
I served as Mr. Rosenstein's principal deputy.
And then Donald Trump appointed you to serve as U.S. Attorney for the District of Maryland. Is that correct?
President Trump nominated me to serve in that position, and I was unanimously confirmed by the United States Senate.
That's correct. And thereafter, Attorney General Merrick Garland appointed you to serve as special counsel for the United States Department of Justice to conduct a full and thorough investigation of certain matters to determine whether or not Joseph Biden should be charged with unlawfully removing and retaining classified documents. Isn't that correct?
Correct.
And nowhere in that order does Attorney General Garland authorize you to conduct an investigation and issue a report on whether President Biden is mentally fit to serve as president. Isn't that correct?
That does not appear in the appointment order.
And pursuant to your appointment to conclude your investigation, you issued a report that was published by Attorney General Garland, correct?
He made it available to Congress, sir.
And your report concluded that after a full and thorough investigation, the evidence was insufficient to establish that President Biden had willfully retained classified documents. Isn't that correct?
My judgment was that based on the state of the evidence, a conviction at trial was not the probable outcome.
And you determined that there was no evidence of willful retention because each time classified documents were discovered to be in the president's possession, the White House notified the National Archives right away. The Biden legal team and the White House fully cooperated with the National Archives during the investigation. Once the DOJ opened the investigation, President Biden and his personal counsel fully cooperated. Isn't that correct?
We did identify some evidence of willful retention and disclosure, but we also
the point
noted
is, though, that the president cooperated fully with you. And didn't they never tried to hide any documents from you, did they?
The report does note steps of cooperation taken by the president.
Thank you, sir. And last but not least, unlike in the Trump classified documents case, President Biden's counsel never falsely certified that there was no classified documents in the president's possession, correct?
The report does include some comparisons and contrasts between the facts alleged in the Trump case and the Biden case.
Despite clearing President Biden from being prosecuted, you used your report to trash and smear President Biden because he said in response to questions over a 5-hour interview that he didn't recall how he got the documents. And you knew that that would play into the Republicans' narrative that the president is unfit for office because he's senile. And the American people saw during the State of the Union address that that was not true. But yet that's what you tried to offer to them, and that's why they are having you here today, so that they can expand upon that narrative. And you knew that that's what was going to happen, didn't you?
Congressman, I reject the suggestions that you have just made. That is not what happened.
Let me move on.
Partisan
then.
politics
Sir,
played no part whatsoever in my work.
You are a member of the Federalist Society, are you not?
And fair.
Are you a member of the Federalist Society?
I am not a member of the Federalist Society.
But you are a Republican, though, aren't you?
I am a registered Republican.
Yes, sir. And you're doing everything you can do to get President Trump reelected so that you can get appointed as a federal judge or perhaps to another position in the Department of Justice. Isn't that correct?
Congressman, I have no such aspirations, I can assure you, and I can tell you that partisan politics had no place whatsoever in my work. It had no place in the investigative steps that I took. It had no place in the decision that I made, and it had no place in a single word of my report.
Thank you, sir.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hur, thank you for being here. You know, I think for the folks that may be watching this at home, they might be a little bit confused, and I'm trying to organize this in my mind as well. The way the president is portrayed in your report and just how we feel about him. Was he a well-meaning, forgetful man, as you said? Or was he a man that was focused on history? Was he a man that maintained and retained these top secret documents that should have been not in his home? And was he a man that wanted to prove he was worthy to be president and that his vision of Afghanistan was better than even President Barack Obama's and that his focus on history was most important to him? Do you know which it is?
Congressman, to the extent you're quoting language from my report, I stand by the words in my report.
So you stand by that he was, and let me quote you exactly, quote, a well-meaning but forgetful old man.
I don't think those exact words appear in the report, Congressman, but to the extent that I use words similar to that effect in my assessment of how a jury would perceive Mr. Biden and the evidence relating to him, including his testimony. I do stand by that assessment.
So is it accurate to say that in your interview, President Biden retained and disclosed classified materials as a means to bolster his image as a presidential figure? And I'm asking you for yes or no's here because our time is so limited.
I believe words to that effect are in my report,
So
Congressman.
the answer is yes. Would you agree that President Biden's intent to showcase his legacy provides a motive for his actions concerning classified materials? Yes or no?
It is one of the motives addressed in the report.
Yep, to showcase his legacy. Is it accurate to quote your report that classified documents were found in, quote, badly damaged boxes in his garage near a collapsed dog crate, a dog bed, a Zappos box, and an empty bucket? Is that correct?
Those words do appear in the report.
So that's correct. The answer is yes. Are these secure locations to store classified documents?
They are not.
Okay, so we got a former vice president who is established to have willfully, purposefully retained classified documents in order to highlight his political stature and show his stature as a presidential figure. We have a former vice president who stored classified documents in very unsecured places. We have a former vice president who will not suffer any consequences for all of these actions, all because we say, well, he's a well-meaning, forgetful old man. You know, if you were kind of a well-meaning, forgetful old man that was driving a car and you forgot what you were doing a little bit and you hit somebody and killed them, I believe you'd be responsible. The law must apply, you know this, to everyone. The standard behind the decision not to prosecute Joe Biden, especially in light of Special Counsel Jack Smith's decision to prosecute President Trump for similar conduct, gives the real appearance of two standards. Just again, it's so much part of this Department of Justice. Justice for thee, but not for me. Special Counsel Hur, has any former president or vice president besides President Trump ever been criminally charged for knowingly retaining classified information after they left office? Yes or no?
No.
Would you concur that Special Counsel Smith's decision to charge a former president for retaining and disclosing classified information was an extraordinary, unusual, and unprecedented decision?
I will not comment on that matter.
Well, I'm going to comment. The answer is yes. Special Counsel Hur, these two reports are the culmination, in my mind, of the Department of Justice's two standards, and an example, again, of the Justice Department being weaponized against conservatives. You know, there's another piece to this, too. While I have just a few seconds. We know that when his ghostwriter was speaking to him, he also did recordings. And when he did those recordings, it was clear. In fact, I'll try to quote this here. It was a month in 2017, a month after Biden left as VP. He was aware of top secret classified materials that were, quote, downstairs. Is that true?
That is reflected in an audio recording, yes.
It's reflected in an audio record, you know. So sometimes he may be sleepy, sometimes he may be forgetful, sometimes he may be cognitively impaired. There's no doubt about that. But man, when it came to his personal legacy, the way he wanted to be remembered, to be sure that he was a big deal, in plain English, in the future, he was willingly and knowingly breaking the law. And it's unfortunate that we have a Department of Justice that will treat one person one way and somebody else a different way. It's a sad day for America. Thank you, Mr. Hur. I yield back.
A gentleman yields back. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Hur, I want to ask you about some of the differences between the facts involving President Biden and President Trump. But before I do, I want to refer back to your opening statement in which you said that you did not disparage the president in your report. But of course, you did disparage the president. You disparaged him in terms you had to know would have a maximal political impact. You understood your report would be public, right?
I understood, based on comments that the Attorney General had made, that he had committed to make as much of my report public as consistent with legal policy and legal requirements.
And you could have chosen just to comment on the president's particular recall vis-a-vis a document or a set of documents, but you decided to go further and make a generalized statement about his memory, didn't you?
Congressman, I could have written my report theoretically, in a way that omitted references to the president's memory, but that would have been an incomplete and improper report, and that it did not reflect my analysis
You could have
and the explanation of my decision.
You could have written your
Attorney General.
report with comments about his specific recollection as to documents or a set of documents, but you chose a general pejorative reference to the president. You understood when you made that decision, didn't you, Mr. Hur, that you would ignite a political firestorm with that language, didn't you?
Congressman, politics played no part whatsoever in my investigative steps.
But you
my
understood
decision,
nevertheless,
or the words
didn't
that
you,
I put in my report.
Mr. Hur, you cannot tell me you're so naive as to think your words would not have created a political firestorm. You understood that, didn't you, when you wrote those words, when you decided to include those words, when you decided to go beyond specific references to documents? You understood how they would be manipulated by my colleagues here on the GOP side of the aisle and by President Trump. You understood that, did you not?
Congressman, what I understood is the regulations that govern my conduct as special counsel.
And those regulations
required me to write a confidential report for the Attorney General,
which you knew would not be
explaining my
confidential.
decision, and that is what I did, Congressman. I
Mr. Hur,
followed the rules.
You knew it would not be confidential.
I followed them.
You knew it would not be confidential, didn't you?
Sir, the regulations required me to write a confidential report explaining my decision to the Attorney General.
Which you knew would be released.
It was up to the Attorney General to
Which
determine
you understood it would be released, did you
would
not?
be released consistent with DOJ policy.
You understood it
legal
would be
requirements.
released. You understood it would be released.
I understood from the Attorney General's public comments that he would make as much of my report public as he could, consistent with legal requirements and DOJ
And you also
policy.
understand DOJ policy that you are to take care not to prejudice the interests of the subject of an investigation, right?
That is generally one of the interests that DOJ policy requires that prosecutors respect.
And it was your obligation to follow that policy in this report, was it not?
It was also my obligation to write a confidential report for the Attorney General explaining completely
But
my
what
decision.
you did write was deeply prejudicial to the interests of the president. You say it wasn't political, and yet you must have understood. You must have understood the impact of your words. You must have understood the impact of your decision to go beyond the specifics of a particular document, to go to the very general, to your own personal, prejudicial, subjective opinion of the president, one you knew would be amplified by his political opponent, one you knew that would influence a political campaign. You had to understand that. And you did it anyway. And you did it anyway. And let me just go to some of the differences here between the president's conduct and Mr. Trump's. In the superseding indictment, on page 3, it says that Mr. Trump suggested that his attorney falsely represent to the FBI and grand jury that he did not have documents called for by the grand jury subpoena. You didn't find anything like that with respect to Mr. Biden, did you?
Congressman, I do not have the Trump indictment in front of me, but I need to address something that you said in your prior question. What you are suggesting is that I needed to provide a different version of my report that would be fit for public release. That is nowhere in the rules. I was to prepare a confidential report that was comprehensive and thorough of an explanation.
What is in the
of my
rules,
decision,
Mr. Hur, what is in the rules is you don't gratuitously do things to prejudice the subject of an investigation when you're declining to prosecute. You don't gratuitously add language that you know will be useful in a political campaign. You were not born yesterday. You understood exactly what you were doing. It was a choice. You certainly didn't have to include that language. You could have said, vis-a-vis the documents that were found at the university, the president did not recall. There is nothing more common. You know this, I know this. There is nothing more common with a witness of any age when asked about events that are years old to say, I do not recall. Indeed, they're instructed by their attorney to do that if they have any question about it. You understood that. You made a choice. That was a political choice. It was the wrong choice. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Arizona, did special counsel wish to respond to that final question?
Yes, Congressman, what you are suggesting is that I shape, sanitize, omit portions of my reasoning and explanation to the Attorney General for political reasons.
No, I suggest that you not shape your report for political reasons, which is what you did.
That did not happen, Congressman. That did not happen.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Arizona is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Hur, for being here. Thank you for your report. I've read it. And I think where you and I might have disagreements, there may be matters of opinion and not necessarily the facts as you've reported them. So I want to go over the elements of the offense that seem to have at least struck my craw is the where you put in here twice that the jury would not likely to find intentionality on the part of disclosure in particular. So I want to talk about that for a second. So if it's not willful, we might say an accident, something negligent, careless, that would not necessarily rise to willful or intentional or purposeful, right?
Those are different standards of intent under the law. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So, so when President Biden misplaced 30 briefing documents in 2010 that had classified material, and they're not sure even if they ever got them all back, or when he was in the Hamptons at a party and he lost what they were calling code words, which is high security information, that wasn't necessarily willful. There was no indication that he purposefully did that. Accidental, negligent. You indicated, don't know if we even got all that information back. We're assuming maybe we did. That would not be willful, right?
As reflected in the report, there were certain categories of documents where when we looked into them and investigated how they got to where they ended up or how they ended up being misplaced, we did not identify evidence of willfulness.
Yeah, and so if something's willful, you wouldn't say it's ignorant, it's not incompetent, it's not accidental. We'd say something like it's willful, it's intentional, it's purposeful. It indicates really a choice, that you have made a deliberate, conscious decision to act in a certain way. Is that fair?
That is fair, Congressman. And as I explained in the report, the standard, the willfulness standard basically can be boiled down to the following things: that you know that what you are doing is against the law when you do it.
Correct. So let's take a look at it. And this has been brought up before in February of 2017. He's having the discussion with the ghostwriter. He says, he's at the Virginia house at this point. He says, I just found all the classified stuff downstairs, right? So he knows he's got classified stuff, right? 2 months later, in April, he's at a different location, is my understanding. I think he's now up in Delaware. And as you look at let's look at 105, 106 here. He says, Biden reads from a different notebook entry. He reads aloud from notes summarizing a range of issues. We're talking about U.S. military and views expressed there by the intelligence community, the DNI, CIA director. And while he's reading those notes, he says, I can't read my own writing. Do you have any idea what the heck I'm saying here? He asked the ghostwriter. Ghostwriter says, well, something, blah, blah, blah. And Biden says this, some of this may be classified, so be careful. Some of this may be classified, so be careful. Now, my immediate response was, okay, so he knows he's got classified docs. He's looking at this, he can't read it. He's giving this to somebody he knows has no security clearance. So he says, hey, read this, but be careful, it might be classified. Next thing, and the guy says, okay. Next thing he says, well, I don't know if it's classified or not. I'm suggesting to you, and this is where you and I have a difference of opinion. When you say something like, hey, look, this may be classified, be careful. That warning to be careful because it may be classified, that indicates guilty knowledge. That indicates he might know something more than he otherwise would have. And it indicates, then they go on and they read it. And as you point out here, he reads classified information. And it's still classified today. That's on page 106. So when you look at this, it's hard for me to say, well, he was ignorant, he was incompetent, he was accidental. No. He had guilty knowledge. He knew and told the guy that he's going to expose that classified material to, hey, be careful. Be careful. It may be classified. That indicates something a little bit more than mere knowledge. It indicates that he has some intent there. Because the next thing he should have said is, hey, I don't know if it's classified, but we're going to skip over this until that's resolved. He didn't do that. What he said is, read it anyway. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from California is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Hur, I was moved by your parents' immigrant story and how that has shaped you. And their story is a story that so many of us know through our constituents. It's the story of America. It's a story that the guy who appointed you would end if he was in charge again. It's a story that most of the folks on the other side of the aisle seek to block every day in this room, but it's a story that's persuasive. You want your report to be received with credibility, is that right?
My goal was to provide a thorough explanation of my decision to the Attorney General as I was required to do. And as I said in my opening statement, I felt that I needed to show my work.
And you want to be received as credible, right?
That would be helpful and laudable, yes.
Well, a lot has changed since 2018 for the person who appointed you, former President Trump. Since you were appointed, he was impeached for leveraging 350 million US taxpayer dollars over Ukraine to get dirt on President Biden. He was then impeached a second time for inciting an insurrection. He was charged for possessing classified documents and obstructing justice. He was charged for paying for the silence of a porn star. He was charged in Georgia for his role in January 6th. He was charged in the District of Columbia for his role in January 6th. He owes $400 million to the state of New York for defrauding the state through his taxes, and he has been judged a rapist. You want to be perceived, understandably, as credible, and so I want to first see if you will pledge to not accept an appointment from Donald Trump if he is elected again as president.
Congressman, I'm not here to testify
Seems like
today
an easy
about
answer,
what will happen in the
considering
future.
what I just laid out.
I'm here to talk about the report and the work that went into it. And
But you don't want to be associated with that guy again, do you?
Congressman, I'm not here to offer any opinions about what may or may not happen in the future. I'm here to talk about the work that went into the report, which I stand by.
There were no limits on you as to what you could charge President Biden by the Attorney General, is that right?
The decisions that I made that are reflected in the report are my own.
And you did not bring any charges, is that correct?
Correct.
There were no limits on John Durham and his investigation of the prior administration when he was special counsel, is that right?
I don't believe I have the information required to answer the question about the Durham investigation.
Well, he sat in the same chair that you're sitting in. He told us that he also investigated President Biden and President Obama and did not bring any charges. President Biden sat for an interview with you over 2 days for approximately 10 hours, is that right?
A little over 5 hours, Congressman.
Over 2 days?
Correct.
You know, that's in sharp contrast to a guy who did not sit for an interview when the Mueller investigation took place, that was Donald Trump, did not sit for an interview when he was impeached in this committee room by the Judiciary Committee, did not sit for an interview when the second impeachment occurred and he was invited to sit for an interview for his role in January 6th, and did not sit for an interview in the January 6th case or the classified documents case. Chairman also has not sat for an interview in his own subpoena, but Joe Biden has. I now want to turn you to the transcript and day 1, page 47. You said to President Biden, you appear to have a photographic understanding and recall of the House. Did you say that to President Biden?
Those words do appear on page 47 of the transcript.
Photographic is what you said, is that right?
That word does appear on page 47 of the transcript.
Never appeared in your report, though. Is that correct? The word photographic?
That does not appear in my report.
I now want to show you and play a video of what is absolutely not photographic.
In the failing New York Times by an anonymous, gutless coward. We are a nation that just recently heard that Saudi Arabia and Russia will repeat. I hope they now go and take a look at the oranges of the investigation.
And I watch our police and our firemen down in 7-Eleven, down at the World Trade Center.
And we did with Obama. We won an election that everyone said couldn't be won.
This is the very definition of totalitarianism. And let me begin by wishing you a beautiful, look, you remember this? Do you remember? God bless the United States. The windmills are driving them crazy. They're driving
Time, the gentleman.
whales, I think, a little batty.
Time
And I
the
went to
gentleman
Puerto
has
Rico,
expired.
and I met with the president of the
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hur, I'm way down here at the end of the dais. I think today the Justice Department released the transcripts of the interviews with President Biden. Are you aware of that?
I understand that to be true, yes.
Did you have any involvement in the decision or the timing of the release of the transcripts?
No, Congressman.
Did you make any recommendation about the release of the transcripts or being done or not?
I did not. That was above my pay grade.
Yeah, I don't know why they've been released so close to this hearing, but it sort of, it impacts our ability to evaluate your report and ask you questions about it. But there's one point, just as an illustration, on 221 of your report, you're describing, I think, it's the Afghan pack or something like that about in 2009, I think is the information came from. And